Are there live people?
I don't know if there's live people. Hello, people who are watching online, potentially. We are just about going to get started. Yeah, that's Tom. Tom's dialed in for this. So, thank you. All right. All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Boston Ember. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Tonight, we have a couple different things. We're going to start off with 5 minutes on what do people see coming on the road in 2019 in the JavaScript ecosystem. We're also going to be taking open Q&A. And I guess, Carl, I want to introduce Carl. Carl's going to be facilitating the discussion between the members of the Ember core team who are here tonight. There are many, many, many more of us all over the world who help build Ember. So quick question. Who here has been to a Boston Ember meetup before? Okay, great. Be brave. Is there anyone who has never used Ember before? Okay, so we've got a couple new people.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. The questions are probably going to tend towards Ember questions since so many people here in the room already work with Ember or have been here before. But we really want to open this up to more than just Ember questions. So feel free to throw in questions about, I don't know, JavaScript, CSS, the tools you use for your job, the patterns that you find useful or you want to know more about. So we're definitely not restricting this to just Ember. I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and just go through a couple of our announcements. So, it's this way. Oh no, my screen is not happy. Okay, so firstly, we do have a code of conduct. It's the same as the Ember code of conduct. And if I was to summarize it in a sentence, I would say, be the person that Mr. Rogers wants you to be. If you encounter any issues, have any concerns, or also just want to privately share some feedback about the meetup, you can contact organizers at bostonember.js.com and we'll respond to that. And then more largely in the Ember community, if you encounter issues, we do have, sort of that global, worldwide people who are available to help talk through and take action on any code of conduct issues. That email is ombudsman@ember.js.com. A reminder for everyone, coming up March 18th through 20th in Portland, Oregon is EmberConf. It's the largest Ember conference every year. There are usually a couple others, such as EmberFest and EmberCamp, that are in Europe and then the United States, and those are further on in the year. So this is the big one, but it's also not your only chance to participate. If you don't already know, there's a whole bunch of great ways that you can keep up to date on the latest features of Ember, including some of the things that we're talking about tonight. So if you're wondering more information, you'll want to take a look at these resources, including the Ember Times newsletter, and not Slack, I mean Discord. It's the correct link is there, just the wrong name. And then the other newsletters such as Ember Weekly. We also have Twitter. So I want to say also thank you very much to our hosts Salsify tonight. We wouldn't be able to be here without them. So they provide pizza, they provide space and moral support, and all basically, are a huge part of the existence of this meetup. So is there anyone from Salsify who wants to come talk for a minute? Yeah. Great.
So just wanted to say thanks for coming to the meetup today. Salsify is hiring. We've got a lot of engineering roles open. If you're a data scientist, we have roles in analytics open. If you're calling in right now and you're in Portugal, we have roles in Lisbon open. So if you're looking for a job, come talk to me or anybody else at Salsify. We've got a table of Salsify folks over there. Get a business card or email me at keith@salsify.com.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Also, if you're looking for other remote jobs, another meetup organizer in another city, we've got a whole network of them. Ask if I would share this one. Praxis is hiring. They help people get apprenticeships in jobs that they don't necessarily have a degree in order to do, but are interested in learning and training on the job. They're also hiring for Ember developers. If you are looking for more jobs, you can go to jobs@ember.js.com or visit our Discord in order to see what's out there or advertise your own company's jobs. So is there anyone else who wants to give a shout out to a position that they're hiring for? Okay. Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Hi, my name's Chris. Hi, Chris.
That's okay.
For all engineering levels, directors,
Great. And for anyone who's listening in, Chris was just telling us about a place called PillPack that does not use Ember, but he's an Ember alumni, and I'm sure that your projects are well structured and linted and tested. Yeah. All right. All right. Also, our next meetup is not on the schedule yet, but I just wanted to share we're kind of going at a like every other month pattern for the meetup. So the best way to see when the next one's coming is make sure that you're subscribed to updates through Meetup and to follow us on Twitter to hear when that might be. Are there any other announcements before we get going on this part? Cool. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Carl, and you guys can distribute. I don't know. I set up this table.
oh, you can all sit together.
If you want to, yeah, I mean, I know it's difficult because
No, I like
you're
that.
not,
Damn.
you know,
It makes me
or
feel
stands.
more.
You
I have more
sit.
permission to heckle when I'm on stage.
I don't want to sit down. I'll stand right in front of the mic because I have the lowest volume voice.
All right, very good.
That was humor.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to have to adjust the sound every time. Okay, so Carl,
So,
take us away.
really excited to have a fantastic panel of Ember core team members here today. We'll just do a really quick introduction before we begin any of the festivities. You wanna?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ed Faulkner, EF4 on GitHub, and that's probably enough to go on right now.
I'm Robert Jackson. I am RWJ Blue on the internet.
I'm Dan Gebhardt. I'm DGeb on the internet.
And I'm Jen Weber, and I'm Jen Weber on the internet.
Oh man,
And I think
best name.
we'll find out all about your areas of expertise in the quick lightning talk you're about to give, right? Maybe?
So in at least some cases, yeah.
For the 2/3 of us that did the homework.
Okay. I bet you can come up with something. So we'll just kind of, I think, do a quick.
And I forgot.
Yeah,
Wait,
or
we
do
can't
have a
forget.
video?
Tom, are you
We
ready?
have one more.
Oh, I'm so ready.
All right. Hang on. Let me stop
We have
my
a-
screen
we have
share.
a special guest
And
this
put
evening.
this
And I
here.
think he'll be on the
I'm
big
ready for my close-up.
Wait. I can do this. Hang on.
Enhance.
I can do this. Mirror. Look, I did it. Okay, and then hang on.
Was it
I gotta
painful?
do the sound. Sound.
Sound. Hello.
Once I put you through the sound, there's gonna be terrible feedback things if I don't mute it. So I'm gonna mute it, and then you can talk, and well, that's how we'll do things. Okay.
Hi, my name is Tom Dale on both the internet and in real life.
Wait, I'm not ready yet. Hang on.
Are you ready now? Hi, my name is Tom Dale on the internet and in real life. Okay, can you hear me now? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, well, there's a lot of cheering going on, but I feel like I'm watching like 2001: A Space Odyssey or something, right? Like everything's happening in space. Hey, everyone. My name is Tom Dale on the internet and in real life.
So let's just kind of go off.
I'm going to spend my like 5-minute pitch on what's cool about 2019. The topic was supposed to be what's going to be great about JavaScript, and I'm not going to talk about JavaScript because I'm talking about WebAssembly, and WebAssembly isn't actually JavaScript, but it's definitely a buzzword, and if you're hearing about it, you might be interested. So I'm going to lay out like the 5-minute way I would think about it in 2019. WebAssembly is exciting not because you should learn to write it by hand or anything like that. It's really not designed for that. It's really designed to be something that compilers can target so that arbitrary languages, any language, your favorite programming language that is not JavaScript, can probably compile to WebAssembly. If it doesn't already, it's gonna eventually when somebody works on the tools. So what this means is that now finally the web is gonna be polyglot, right? Like you can write code in C++ or C# or Rust or Python. As long as people make runtimes for any of those, they could be running in the web browser, and that's a pretty exciting development. People focus on a lot when they're thinking about performance. They think about WebAssembly as letting you go faster than JavaScript, and that's not quite subtle enough. JavaScript actually can go just about as fast when all the stars align and the JIT compiler figures out what you really mean and runs things as optimized as it gets. It's already pretty fast. But what the biggest benefit performance-wise you get from WebAssembly is consistent performance. It's very hard to make the browser engines take JavaScript and figure out on the fly how to compile it and optimize it and keep it consistently fast. And that has always been a struggle for anybody who's like diving deep into the guts of browsers and trying to really optimize their code so that it's fast all the time at startup and later. And WebAssembly actually lets you do that optimization pass like when you compile your code and then deliver code that's already optimized and will stay optimized and be consistently fast. So that's one of the things that's exciting about WebAssembly, what it unlocks for the web. So those are the two main takeaways I would say is consistent performance that's beyond what you could have done in the past and making the web polyglot. And none of that is to say that JavaScript will be any less important at all. Like JavaScript still has a massive center of gravity on the web and is going to absolutely continue to. But you'll see it integrating more and more with other languages and other tools for the places where that's really beneficial. How did I do that?
Really good. Right. Fantastic. And do you think there's any particular timeline on things like adoption or starting to integrate?
It's really it works already in. I'm not going to tell you the set of browsers off the top of my head, but most of them already. And so, and even in some of the ones where it doesn't, there's an earlier iteration called Ember.js that is kind of an okay fallback. So it's becoming practical already.
The tooling is starting to get there.
The tooling is kind of the important thing to watch. And so when you're trying to decide at what point in the adoption curve is this like, do I have to be a super risk taker or is this starting to become mainstream? I would look for language tooling, and that goes for whatever particular language you're trying to compile to WASM. The key question is really, can you do all your thinking and debugging in that language without ever dropping out to like looking at the WASM or looking at JavaScript? We've been compiling other things to JavaScript for a long time, CoffeeScript, TypeScript, even just using Babel. We're used to having a compilation step, but all of those things are not true languages in the sense that to use any of those as a practical developer today, you still need to know the JavaScript because you have to debug the JavaScript. A language is truly like a fully featured self-contained language on the platform when the tooling is good enough that you can actually debug it in its own native self and understand it without falling down to another language. So watch for that kind of tooling to decide something's really mature on the web.
It's not here yet, but
it's not here yet, but it's still getting exciting. And especially as the guts of other things, Ember itself, the Glimmer.js rendering pipeline has like an experimental mode that can already compile your templates and render them with WebAssembly to try to get more consistent render performance.
So you can do it in Ember right now if you're on the cut at the bleeding
Yeah,
edge.
at like early adopter level.
With a magical incantation of feature flags.
Yeah, it's not mainstream, but it's a good technology. It was a demo, and it gives us a way to consistently measure, is the platform ready? Like we can always go back to that code and say, like, how does it run now? What browsers does it support? Is it debuggable? And keep our finger on the pulse for when we're ready to go mainstream.
Right. How about one really quick question, and then we'll one quick question, then we'll have a lot more questions during our Q&A.
Access to all like the browser APIs from WASM, or is it like a very strict subset?
You effectively do, but there is definitely today some like interface performance cost to crossing from WebAssembly out to the rest of the regular JavaScript stuff. You can call back and forth. Different browsers have radically different costs around that right now. That's one of the areas that's still improving. And it's one of the things that makes things that sound like obvious wins are not always yet in WebAssembly, because you realize, oh, that has to call out to some browser function. And the calling itself is just like a barrier right now that impacts your performance and makes the extra speed of the WebAssembly tight loop not worth it. But that is rapidly getting fixed, and browsers are getting better at it.
More questions? We'll get to it a little later tonight.
All right. Can we do Tom next?
Let's do Tom. Let's go to the big video.
Hey, y'all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, okay, perfect. Oh, I can hear you. You sound great. So Ed gave almost exactly the answer that I was planning on giving. So thanks a lot, Ed. Now I have to riff a little bit. But I think what Ed said is exactly right. I'm a big fan of the web as something more than just like an abstract technical tool. I think the web is really an accomplishment of humankind. And I think the fact that we have this like really amazing application platform that is not controlled by any one entity, that you have so much freedom to experiment with and deploy applications on without any kind of intermediary is like a really exciting thing. It's a thing that's valuable and it's worth fighting for. And I think when the smartphone revolution happened and native apps were just like so good, and the web app experience on these devices was so crappy, I think it was like really easy for people to think like, okay, well, that's it, right? Like the web came and then now it's leaving and it's going to be replaced by native apps. And that was like the golden era, and it's over. But if I think about reasons why the web is so powerful on the desktop, like why is it when you have really amazing native APIs like Cocoa on Mac, and I mean, I don't know if Win32 is a great API, maybe not, but you can build these like really powerful, rich experiences, right? So why is it that we just build for the web on the desktop by default? And I think the reason for it is that we reach a level of performance and capability on the desktop where you're not really losing anything by going on the web, but you get something very powerful. And the thing that you get is the URL. The fact that you can be using this application and you can bookmark that URL, you can copy it, you can paste it into an email, you can send it in an IM, and anyone anywhere on the planet can click that URL and boom, they're instantly seeing what you're seeing. There's no app store. There's no trying to remember your Apple ID password and typing it 5 times in a row, right? There's no downloading a 300 megabyte binary. You just tap and within a second or two, it's there, right? It's so frictionless. I think especially for businesses, if you're building a business or a product, that kind of seamless sharing gives you that like a virality that's super, super important. And so I think that is the key thing that WebAssembly gives you. Not like Ed was saying, not just like all raw turbo performance, you're like Joe Turbo hacker, just like eking as much performance out of this thing as possible. It's really about preserving that instant startup feel of the web, that instant startup that's so important. And I think you combine that with tools like Webpack or Rollup that can use the newer static syntax in JavaScript as a language to understand better the dependencies between these modules. And what that lets us do is get as smart with our code as we are about the data that we load, right? I suspect that many folks working on web applications, you open the network profile and you see exactly what data requests are being made, and you're like, you know what? Maybe we'll wait to fetch the data for the sidebar until we can load the data, until the main data has loaded. But historically in JavaScript, the code aspects has just been one big blob that you had to load up front, and especially on lower end smartphones, or if you're like me, you're on the subway in New York, you don't have great reception. Having to wait for that big blob of code to load before you see anything can be really detrimental to the user experience and be really detrimental to that really fast startup that's so critical to the web. So to me, the union of those two things is really exciting, because it means that we can increase the sophistication and the complexity of the apps that we're building, but we don't have to make a trade-off of taking a hit on that load time and that performance. So to me, that's like the really exciting thing, right? Like even today, if I open Photoshop on my Mac, it takes like 10 seconds to start up. This is used to be a top of the line iMac with 64 gigs of RAM or whatever. That's an experience that just wouldn't be acceptable on the web. And so the fact that we can start thinking about, like, we're going to have tooling that lets us build Photoshop or Adobe Lightroom on the web, but without having to give up on that ability to instantly load and instantly start up. And I think that, like, to me, one of the reasons I'm so excited about Ember and the rendering engine of Glimmer VM is because we think about templates in Ember as really being a functional programming language. You think about things like like Haskell or Clojure or Elm, right? These very functional programming languages that push you towards a paradigm where you're passing data in and you operate on it with pure functions and you produce a result. That's how we think about templates. But those oftentimes have this like very intense academic bubble around them that can, I think, turn people off. They're not very approachable. So I think what we've done is kind of interesting, right? Which is like we've tricked a whole generation of web programmers into learning about functional programming languages by making it look syntactically like HTML. So it's getting back what Ed was saying. The reason I'm so excited about WebAssembly is because if you think about the most expensive part of your application, the biggest bottleneck in your application, it's when it starts up and you all of a sudden have to generate all this UI to put on the page really, really quickly, but your JavaScript VM is still, it hasn't warmed up, right? You're still cold. You haven't gone through this JIT optimization process. So if we can compile your templates into a specialized program that we can start executing very quickly with WebAssembly, we're effectively doing what I was saying was it's a polyglot environment. It just so happens that one of those languages that we can target to the browser is handlebars, these templating languages.
That's great. Thanks so much. If anyone has one question really fast, and Tom, are you going to be able to stick around later, or is this? Do we have I'm gonna stick around until my wife kicks me out of the bedroom. All right. Well, get some sleep tonight, whatever you end up doing. Yeah. All right, great. Sounds good. We'll move ahead to who wants to go next?
Sure, I can go next.
Right.
Tom kind of set me up a little bit, talking about big blobs of data. So I'll pick right up there, and also startup costs. As many of you know who have heard me talk about data over the years, dealing with client-side data is one of my interests, and I see that dealing with those blobs of data is one of the areas where we still need to improve on the client side. And I'm excited because there's some web technologies that are available now to us that can help out with that. For a long time, we've been dealing with data on the client side by fetching that data with $.ajax or the newer fetch API, and then we've been in the simplest apps just fetching it fresh for every view that we're displaying, and we don't have to worry about staleness because we're always going to get a fresh set of that data. On the negative side, there's network latency involved in every one of those fetches. So if we start caching data, which we can do now that we have IndexedDB on the client side, we can put some of that data, we can put it first simply in memory, like Ember Data's basic approach. And we can also cache that data with browser storage in IndexedDB, which is available, of course, on all the evergreen browsers. And there's, there can be downsides to an approach which sort of naively caches everything, where there could be a large startup cost where you're pulling data from that cache. You're doing this all on the main thread. JavaScript applications are working on a single thread. They're competing with intensive data processing that might be coming from your big blobs of data, with rendering and routing and general application code. So it's a real struggle. And if you've ever seen jank in web applications, and we all have, then a lot of it's due to this competition. So one of the great tools that I think is, cresting, the wave is cresting this year in terms of widespread popularity, much like I think WASM will too, will be the widespread use of web workers in general to handle background processing of every kind. So for the first time with web workers, which are now available on all evergreen browsers, you can start a new thread separate from the Windows main thread and do processing in that thread. And so what this means is that you can free up your main thread to do application DOM-specific things. And you can use that background worker thread to do more data-intensive processing. You can also have access to almost all the web APIs that don't involve DOM. So you can use fetch, you can use IndexedDB, you can use WebSockets, and you can interact from your worker back with the main thread through post messages, which can be sent from the main thread to the worker, or events, which can be listened to from the main thread, on the main thread, and sent from the worker. So you have this communication medium that happens between the threads, and you can offload a lot of that data-intensive processing. Now, how many of you have heard of service workers? Okay, it's really, service workers are a type of web worker that, and just for folks listening at home, it's probably a good 80% of folks raised their hand here. So it's a pretty well-known technology. And it's been evangelized by Google especially, but now it's available across all browsers and pushed as the technology behind progressive web apps. So it's a bit of a Swiss Army knife approach to building web apps that can compete on a very long checklist against native apps. There's instant load screen, you can cache assets, you can do everything. Because service workers are a specialization of web workers, then they can do everything that I discussed about web workers in general. So you can do that in your service worker code. I think service workers are far and away the star pupils of the worker class there, but that sounds a little. I'm not talking economic theory, but yes, right. I was wondering if talking about workers so much, I might get into Marx, but I only have 5 minutes, so we're going to keep going. So another.
We're at the 5 minutes.
We're at 5 minutes. Okay. I'll say one last thing, that that workers are still evolving, and there's a type of worker called a shared web worker, which is not yet fully supported by all browsers, but is supported by Firefox and Chrome. And shared web workers are pretty cool because they can be shared among multiple windows. So if you have an app that is opened across multiple tabs or even across iframes, they could all access the same shared worker and you could use that centralized worker thread to do common data access or processing and keep the processor load as light as possible, and keep your app running as simply as possible too, because there's only that one worker accessing your data set. So that's something that I hope will be reaching full maturity this year. But I think it's really exciting to think about what we can do with web workers in general, and not just service workers, not just look at them as like a cookie cutter approach to building PWAs, but think about all the different processing we can offload into them. And anyway, that's my my pick for 2019.
Cool.
Yeah.
Jen?
For skipping Rob. Or you want to ad-lib it?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, he's at least as good as these guys. All right, so I've got a pick, but I have to tell you some background information first. So I am in my late 30s. I've been a lifelong Cubs fan. Until very recently, that meant that I was also both optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. I don't know if there's a word for that, but it's always next year. I've also used Linux on the desktop for quite a long time as well, which is also another example of a little bit of both. A little bit of both. So the thing I'm going to tell you about is decorators. So
I like the analogy.
Decorators is a little bit of an underdog, apparently. It's taken a long time. The spec has been around. I want to say the first time I saw it and started hacking at things was in 2015. It could be older than that, but that's when I made an add-on that made it possible to use decorators in Ember. Decorators are, for those of you that don't know, decorators are a syntax for you to decorate existing JavaScript class definitions and method definitions and fields and whatnot in JavaScript. And for those of you that aren't super familiar, classes are the second most awesome new feature in JavaScript, after async await, of course. And with decorators, once they've sort of advanced to the later stages in the sort of the language development process, with decorators, we'll actually be able to replace lots and lots of the internals of what we've been using in Ember, the Ember object model. And those of you that write Ember apps, you're familiar with like Ember object extend and computer properties and all of this stuff. We'll be able to replace lots of the things that seem not just JavaScript in your Ember apps with just JavaScript, which is really, really awesome. So you heard it here first. This is the year of decorators. Decorators are going to advance to stage 3 this year. That's what I say.
Right.
I also said the Cubs were going to win the World Series for like roughly 35 years before that happened. So, we've only got another 30 years to wait.
Awesome.
Well, for longtime Red Sox fans, it's no problem.
But they only know half the pain as a Cubs fan, right? So
Linux on the desktop.
yeah,
Decorators.
same thing.
This year.
Yep, you heard it here. Boston Ember. That's all I got.
Thanks. Jen, how about you?
Cool. So things I'm excited for in 2019 in JavaScript land. I pay a lot of attention to learning materials that are out and about as part of my volunteer work to help write and maintain the Ember.js guides. And the more I see within our own community and outside of our own community makes me excited for the learning story in 2019. So, I've seen a couple articles that say things like, "Oh, wow, learning to build web apps is like so hard and complicated now, and how does anyone ever manage?" I see on the flip side a place where we have so many learning materials written at so many different levels of experience for so many different target audiences. And things are a whole lot different than when I took an online course at a community college to learn HTML. Like that was hard. We were just building plain vanilla JavaScript apps. compared to now where I can pull up a tutorial and go through step by step to build something awesome. So to give an example that's not in Ember, there's a little library called Pixie.js that is used for rapid rendering in 2 and 3 dimensions. You can pick up a tutorial and make your own little dungeon crawler with little sprites and like attack animations and things by just following this step-by-step guide. And you don't even necessarily need to understand every step in order to get your hands into the problem and trying to figure out like, okay, what's going on? How do I change this? Maybe I want this game to be about cats instead of like, you know, knights and dragons. So in 2019, I just see there being more tutorials that are written by, you know, people who consider themselves unofficial, like blog posts, blog articles. And the more of those things that come into being, the easier it becomes to find your niche of things that you're interested in building and connect with other people. Those are the things I see for 2019 for the larger JavaScript community. For Ember, I'm really excited about some work that's underway to improve the learning story and the guides, to do a better job of introducing Ember to people who haven't learned it before, to not throw them too much into the deep end with details, and kind of do a better job of introducing the web development concepts that are behind Ember, because we all have to learn eventually, you know, how do you do routing? How do you do testing? How do you manage your file structures? And so if we can ease people into that a little better, I think that's going to be awesome.
Sounds great. So we've had a nice little intro, kind of the state of things and what we see coming up for the next year. What we can kind of switch over to is now a Q&A session. Can be all the questions on here, all the questions online. Anybody on YouTube, I got it on the phone here, so I'll try my best to watch. And then, yeah, we also had a number of questions that were submitted before. Try to go fairly rapidly, so like, again, kind of a 5-minute guideline on every question. And instead of going right down the list and having everybody answer every single question like on some panels, we'll just go maybe 1 or 2 people. You know, if someone has something they really want to add, you know, go for it. So, and Tom, are you still there, or are you going to sleep?
I think Tom has left.
Good night.
Tom has left.
All right, so it's us here in the room. So, if I was going to start, I guess, is there any question from what we just heard that really stuck out? Yes.
Are decorators more like adding metadata to your class, like Java, or do they actually add functionality?
So the question was, are decorators just adding metadata, or are they also functionality? The answer is they can do both, but generally speaking, it's actual JavaScript that runs at runtime. It is not just metadata. It's general, like it can be that. Like, for example, there are decorators like the compute property decorators, if you've used compute properties, where you might say your dependent keys. Those decorators, the decorators for computed, let you specify dependent keys. So it's tracking the dependent key metadata about the property. However, when the decorator runs, it's able to modify, like it basically gets access to the function or the getters and setters or whatever that you decorate, and it can mutate them, it can wrap them, it can basically do magic and transform it into other things. It can add multiple properties. It can do many things, right? It really ends up being an easy way to think about like a specific bit of you know, basically magic, right? Like things that you don't have to internalize. You don't have to understand how it works. There are good mental models for how to think about it. Like, oh, it's just creating a getter and a setter for me when I just gave it a field name, for example, or it's things like that. So you can think about it like that, but it can also do lots and lots of other things.
Yeah, Python decorators are a pretty strong analogy, similar capability.
I think of them as useful for cross-cutting concerns, like that would be useful. Yeah. So you could like mark a property as read-only or typed or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you've worked on any kind of frameworky code in other languages, like like Python, like Java, you've seen these kind of capabilities, like C#. You tend to reach for these kind of capabilities. JavaScript has lacked them until now, and it has only, we've only just got classes, and now we need to like beef them up to have this to really like close the loop, and to finally be able to say that all the things that Ember had to build completely from scratch internally by hand in the early days, we built all of that stuff, right? A class system, an inheritance system, decoration, just all in plain old code. And finally now the language itself is starting to have native ways to do those things very well. I think the reason there had to be that preface about optimism or pessimism is just that like this feature has taken a long time to get consensus in the language design committee process, and it's partly because like this is JavaScript growing up and like getting all the features that any language gets eventually when it starts to get a full featured class system, and it's going to be used in the on large systems. And that's kind of like a cultural shift for some of the people that they think about JavaScript. They don't want to see it get like frameworky features. So it has taken more effort getting people to agree about it.
And I also think that it's fundamentally cross-cutting. So it necessarily takes more design work, and more like it impacts more things because it can technically change more things.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not, it's a big deal.
Excellent. Other questions, either in general or especially from like the intro stuff that we had? Yeah.
Do you see any path of some sort of data merging strategy coming to data anytime soon, for like merging multiple sources of data into like?
That's like
quick thing, actually. Yeah, can you repeat the question? If whoever is answering the question first, if you can repeat it.
Yeah. So the question was, do you see ways of merging multiple sources of data in coming to Ember data soon? And
can we define maybe what multiple sources would be for?
So do you? Okay, yeah. If you want to throw out a few
Sure,
examples.
So I'm thinking like you have an app that where multiple people can edit the same post, for example, at the same time, and you have the version that's on the server, the version that someone else is editing, the version that perhaps a third person is editing. When you open the document on your client, you want to make sure that whatever changes they're making are coming through to you. There's some kind of strategy. I mean, that's a complex example, but
yes,
the path towards that idea.
So the example given was say a document editing situation where there are multiple editors working on the same document, and it would be merged at the server and resent out to all the editors and synced up in real time. So it's definitely there's definitely a bit of a ways to go for Ember data to get to that point. Well, I hate to plug my own talks, but I did give a talk at EmberConf in 2018 about the future of data in Ember, and I think and I kind of talked about a similar scenario to this, where the data needs of a lot of applications are getting a lot more complex, and they need to deal with a lot of different sources of data. Not just multiple editors working on the same document, but also just even more simply, just working offline, keeping caches of data that you've edited locally, and you need to sync those back up with the server, or you want real-time data coming back, which might be fits in with your example. So in order to support that, Ember data definitely needs to expose some aspects of itself that have been up until now more internals, and the internals have been pretty inaccessible and difficult to work with. And so I'm working on the Ember data team now, and we're going through a rather radical simplification effort where we're simplifying and modernizing the code. At the same time, we're exposing some interfaces of things that have previously been internals, and allowing for essentially middleware to plug into those internals at these new public interfaces. So we're exposing these interfaces and making them public so that we're not going to, your add-ons that hook into these things aren't going to break all the time. And also it allows for a lot of different capabilities from different add-ons, since applications are getting a lot different needs now. Some need to work offline, some don't. Some need, to have multiple editors on the same dock, etc. So by exposing those internals, that's the first step. And so I also work on a data access library called Orbit, and one of my goals has been of working with the Ember data team is to make sure that Orbit can hook into those new interfaces and work fully. And Orbit allows for access and synchronization to a number of different data sources. So hopefully we can have the power and flexibility of Orbit paired with Ember Data's easy to use ergonomic interfaces, where you're working with the store and models primarily, and then but with that easy to use front end, you can do some more complex configuration to suit your needs, and get a lot more capabilities. So that's my hope for 2019. So
I wanted to define Ember Data. Sure. For people who aren't. So if you're not familiar with Ember, Ember Data is a library that ships with Ember by default that helps you make requests to your API, as well as manage the local cache of data, especially useful for relational data. So instead of writing something that says like, Ajax, I'm going to make a post request and here's my headers in order to get data. And then when data comes back, you have to update, things. Use methods like find record or save that do that work for you. So
yeah, and I was going to build on that context, just point out that when you have very specific needs, when they're like, if you have a central piece of your application, that the whole point of it is, say, like collaborative document editing, right? That's often an area where it's totally fine to go deep on actually implementing your own thing, or picking whatever the best library is out there that handles that case for you, and saying like, Ember Data is deliberately there to, like, as the starter case that handles the vast 80% case. But when you've got something really special that's unique about your app that's worth investing in, like doing something custom, you absolutely totally can, and you don't have to use Ember Data for it. And people sometimes think it's very entangled, and you have to. It's there because it helps you on the vast majority of cases, but when it doesn't, totally don't use it, and that's totally fine. And people like to use other things with Ember too, other data loading libraries, other patterns, and that all totally works great. So the API boundary between Ember and Ember Data is actually like very well factored. It's not deeply entangled. You don't have to do it. You don't lose a whole lot. You end up having to make more choices. And part of the point of trying to come up with good defaults as a community is that as you're starting out, you don't have to make all these choices up front. But when you find the need, then it's time to say, yeah, okay, totally, let's swap in something else that's more specialized for my app.
A quick question. We were talking just a little bit about offline and caching, things like this. How many people of the software everybody's working on, how many people have a web app, whether it's written in Ember or something else, where offline use is required right now? Not many, like 3 or 4 hands, I think. How many would like to be able to add that, though? I'm curious to theirs.
I put my hand down. Yeah. I wish I had.
So I guess that's it's something I'm curious about too. Even on our web app, we basically punted on that because it can be tricky, right? It's a really difficult problem.
Yeah. You now have a distributed computing system. I mean, you always kind of do in a web app, but you have it's always a distributed system, but you have a saving grace of like nuking all the state on a refresh. You lose that once you actually have like definitive canonical state on the client. And so it's very easy to much more permanently pwn yourself.
I'm familiar with that.
Maybe we should all just embed a little bomb with a fuse like Docker does, right? In our web apps.
Yeah.
So
what does that do? Just like
just
nuke the whole thing?
Nukes everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beside the hamburger.
I mean, to be serious though, when if you deploy an app and service workers and stuff, you absolutely do want to build in a kill switch.
And you better do it good because it's easy to mess it up.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's exciting to see not too many people are supporting offline mode, but like as the tooling or as the libraries get more developed, like hopefully we all can start like doing it much easier.
It's definitely the kind of thing that falls into infrastructural where if you're like on a deadline to ship a product, you really don't want to have to write this stuff at that level. You want to be picking up a thing that works. Like, you know, if something like PouchDB, for example, meets your needs, great, because it like does synchronization. It has limitations. It's not for everything, but like if there's an off-the-shelf thing with a high-level API that meets your needs, that's a good choice. If you're gonna like use fetch and like IndexedDB and then do your own synchronization system, like factor in an extra engineer year. Because it's just that's what it takes. And you know, so all of this stuff, WebAssembly included, right? You really just the fundamentals are there for us to build community solutions and then build apps. But if you try to do that whole leap on your own, it's just it's a big lift.
Yeah.
I wish you had told me that before I started Orbit those years ago.
Yeah, well, now you've done it for us, though. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a question here? We also have a list of questions online, but other questions? Yes.
So when it does come to WebAssembly, you thought that, you know, kind of like your average Joe developer will be, you know, needing to kind of consider, you know, optimization to that extent where they would be considering what that's going to look like in WebAssembly, or is this going to be something that kind of more like the framework level is going to be what's driving it, where everything kind of behind the scenes is going to be
I would expect it's more framework level.
And the question.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. The question was yes, like is something like having to think about using WebAssembly to optimize, is that really an application developer concern, or is that going to be more like something that framework authors think about? I definitely think it's much more likely in the framework and tool space. There's a lot of reasons you don't want to have to go directly to WebAssembly as an app developer. So, you know, something I didn't go into is that like WebAssembly has no garbage collection, right? Like it's extremely low level, right? Like when you compile something like Rust or C to WASM, you have to bring along your own libc, your own standard library that like has a memory allocator and all of that stuff. It's extremely low level. So you don't want to reach for that willy-nilly. And it's probably not going to be a win if you're like, you know, I have this like one function in my code that runs a ton and it would be really nice to make it faster. Let me write it in WebAssembly. Most likely that won't be a win, just because like to bring in another language implies a certain amount of overhead. Like you're going to bring a memory allocator and stuff like that, or you're going to write something extremely low level and hard to maintain. So I don't expect it's something that app developers will be like directly doing. I think the way you'll encounter it much more would be using something like for example, having your templating system in an Ember app is actually it's compiling the code that's runs in WebAssembly, right? Or you'd like adopt an actual language like pick whatever language, something that you think is cool and you want to write a web app in. You would just be like, you wouldn't think of it as learning WebAssembly. You'd think of it as learning how to use some web framework that is in Python or is in Clojure or whatever, right? And that's probably how you encounter it.
To add on that too, I've seen a little bit of, I work in data analysis and data visualizations and like some things where we're offloading computationally expensive things into the browser in specific use cases. And sometimes there are scripts and things available in the open source community that you can take advantage of in order to get the benefits of using WebAssembly without writing it yourself, depending on what kind of domain your app is in.
Yeah, I think there's a third option, which is that some sort of hybrid where your framework provides some tooling so that you can do, like, because we're experimenting with the rendering engine in WASM, so we're obviously necessarily shipping some amount of stuff already with the GC with those things involved. So it's totally possible that you can like we can allow co-location of like your code in the same sort of harness.
Yeah, but like the old pattern of having some C code that actually embeds a little bit of assembly, right? You can imagine that. Yeah. I will also throw in a pitch that if you actually have some code that's already compiled to WebAssembly and you want to use an Ember app, Ember Auto Import can just suck it in. It's very easy.
Oh, hey. Noted. I did something different. All right.
Note to self.
Yeah, yeah. You see, I've got my stack of sticky notes here.
And just before I get to the next question, we did ask at the top, how many people have never used Ember? I am curious, how many people are actively developing, like, semi-regular, maybe not every day, but, you're touching an Ember app with some regularity? Okay, so about like half, little over half. So get that benchmark.
Quick question for Ed. Could you explain the embroider spec?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So the question was, can I explain the embroider spec? So this is something I haven't really published or even talks about. It's open, but it's open on GitHub. So I've got a new experimental build pipeline working for Ember apps. My goal was to kind of rethink it, knowing everything we know now, and basically try to hitch our wagon to taking advantage of a lot of stuff that's out in the wider JavaScript community today that wasn't there when we got started. So when Ember CLI was first created as our build tool, at that point, it was still actually highly controversial to have a build tool at all, and lots of people thought that was a terrible idea. We were right. Turned out everybody accepts that now. But secondly, there was nothing out there other than very low-level task runner kind of stuff. So we had to do it all ourselves, and it has served us extremely well. But at this point now, there's actually other massive investment going on into build tools, and it's nice to be able to take advantage of that stuff. And so most of the barrier to that is really just factoring apart the things in our build system that are knowledge about JavaScript versus knowledge about Ember apps in particular and their conventions. And we deliberately have conventions that go beyond just JavaScript, because if we have shared conventions, there's a lot of great developer benefits to that, where you can dive into any Ember app and know where things are because there's strong conventions, right? And there's less code to write because as long as everybody follows the conventions, it's convention over configuration. So we like that there's strong conventions, but we need to basically be able to translate those into basically take care of just that piece, and then be able to hand something that is just JavaScript semantics off to build tools that only understand JavaScript but don't understand Ember. So for example, Webpack, parcel, rollup, right? That kind of stuff. We already use some of those internally today within the build pipeline, but we don't really let them kind of have global view of an entire Ember app. To do that, you really want to be able to compile away the Emberisms as the first stage, and then hand off just JavaScript to a JavaScript build tool. And so that gives us a lot of nice capabilities. Embroider is intended to kind of walk us down that path and show how it can work in a way that's actually backward compatible and existing Ember apps can use. So much of the value proposition of writing one is being able to have access to the deep add-on ecosystem and all the shared stuff you get. So it would not be cool to try to have a build pipeline that doesn't give you that, right? So most of what I've focused on is how do you take all of today's code out there and compile it up to something that actually meets a very rigorous spec that we can then hand off to general purpose Java build tools. So Embroider is a toolchain that does that. It's experimental quality right now. I haven't written any docs about how to use it, but the code is all open, and folks who are interested should talk to me more, and we could look together. For example, if you wanted to try to get your app to build and tell me what doesn't work or whatever, you could do that kind of thing. The spec that goes with it, in that repo, I have a spec, and it's basically considered an early draft for what will become an RFC as this stuff matures, and as our confidence in the spec being right matures. For something that doesn't directly affect most app developers, but it's the format of what is an Ember add-on, what is an Ember package, and what gets published to NPM that comprises an Ember add-on. Today, Ember add-ons are extremely powerful. Dynamically at runtime, they could do almost anything they want. That has been good because people have innovated a lot with them. But principle of least power is this idea that if your code can do anything, there's not much you can do to optimize and understand it from the outside. And that's one. Well, I'm underselling the principle of least power. There's many reasons why you don't want to offer more power than necessary to software. But one of them is that we can't necessarily see and optimize and traverse this kind of code. So tools even like your IDE, have a harder time understanding where code is in an Ember add-on because it can very dynamically change what it thinks its own code is when you build. And so the spec is a proposal to rein in a lot of the dynamic stuff, make add-ons be much more understandable from the outside and much more static in terms of what their code is, while giving them alternative ways to do the things they need to do that are dynamic, like things like at build time decide what code to include and what to strip, but doing it in a way that is actually transparent to build systems, IDEs, tools like TypeScript, tools like Sass. Can they actually get global visibility across all your add-ons? So the spec is about getting us closer to that. I think it's close to being something that could be an RFC. Robert is telling me I should have submitted it way back. I think, but it keeps changing, and maybe that's fine. We can keep iterating on RFC, but and again, it mostly doesn't affect app authors at all, really. It's about add-on authors, and even for them, it's more about what they publish and not what they author in. I deliberately didn't say anything about that. So
now we've hit the 8 o'clock mark, which means our eyelids might be getting slightly heavier. So now we're going to shift gears, I think, unexpectedly, and maybe do a little bit more of a lightning round kind of thing, because we got a bunch of questions still around, and we even got one online. So how about a minute or two for this? We just got one from Gary McGee, asked online, are we likely to see immutable models and/or change sets like Ember change set add-on become part of Ember Data or Ember Core?
Well,
no,
yeah, they're not part of Ember Core, but they will take advantage of those interfaces that we're exposing in Ember Data, and they will be much less fragile and much more standardly integrated with Ember Data itself, and so they'll eventually be able to have even more capabilities too as we expose those interfaces. But I'm sure that they will not be part of Ember Core or Ember Data Core, but Ember Data itself will get leaner, but just have a wider array of compatible add-ons that are more stable.
So TLDR, no.
No.
But we want to make it easier for that to work well.
That's right. See, I have a hard time saying no.
Short answer on what's Ember change sets.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a way of tracking sets of changes to a model. Yeah,
say you have a form, and normally in Ember, if you bind your form directly to the current user object, as they type their first name, you're going to see their first name update in the UI. Say you want to have a buffer between the two things. Say you want to let them update the form, and then when they hit save, actually save the thing. And you'll get a change set for the set of things they've done, and then you can apply that. That's
yes.
Excellent.
I mean, there's a lot more you can do too, but that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. Someone had asked on the questions earlier about Embroider. Was that you? Had you submitted one on the form? Good. We got someone about that. And someone says it seems very, very interesting about Embroider. So
I think so too.
Kind of along the lines of a little bit what Tom mentioned and kind of what a lot of us mentioned about speed, getting things up and running as absolutely fast as possible. There's nothing faster than a static website, right? And someone had asked in the earlier questions, they said, are there any plans to make it easier to create static websites with Ember, similar to something like Gatsby?
I already did that.
No, let's hear about it.
It's called Prember.
Prember.
And it's just, so, Ember Fastboot is already the way that you can server-side render an Ember app. That really, what that gives you is actually a server, right, that will say, please, here's the URL, give me back the HTML, right? That's what Fastboot does. Prember just wraps your build system around that, so that you basically provided a function that will tell it what URLs exist, and it will go and render them all. So that when you say Ember build, it renders them all to HTML. So you just get a file of HTML. So and when like it goes out to the browser, it still can boot up the full Ember app, right? It's still the fast boot experience, but it's all static. So you can deploy Prembered sites to GitHub pages or whatever like that, and it's just all cool. It works. That's awesome.
Can I add something too?
Yes.
So the Ember guides, I believe they use Prember or a similar approach. So if you want to see an example of server-side rendered apps, that's a good thing to do, is actually look at that source code. Additionally, there's been some work in the community around making it easier to have static sites like blogs and things built in Ember. So Chris Manson's work to kind of bring some of the functionalities of Ghost into Ember in like a templated, fast way. There's lots of good examples out there.
Fantastic. Lots of options. Another question was, any other questions in the room, maybe? Yes.
I have a question about service workers and workers in general. A lot of times the service workers themselves are their own artifact, I think, right? Like web workers are a compiled JavaScript artifact that gets produced. And I was wondering, I was trying to think to myself, like right now I think the Ember service worker dockyard add-on, the source code for your service worker lives in the application code itself. The future of these artifacts, where will they live? Will they be a part? I mean, you have module unification coming, I think, or I'm not too knowledgeable about, states of that.
Nobody is.
You have, I think there's like a UI directory underneath there. Will there be a service worker underneath that? Or I was just thinking, is this something that you would probably just build as a separate repository in its entirety and have, like, where does the source code for that worker artifact?
I think
where does the source code for a worker live?
So I think like most things, the answer is it depends. So I think having them be separate repos enforces a certain amount of rigidity between the way the service worker itself works with the app. And sometimes that's really, really, really awesome. And sometimes it's really, really, really painful. So that's not always the best answer. I think there's a number of possible solutions you could imagine having the service worker co-located with the thing, but outside the app directory, like as it is a standalone buildable asset. I think in the Embroider world, it becomes massively easier to do the thing that currently Ember Service Worker does, which is essentially you want to point it as an entry point and it will build a separate asset. It becomes way simpler than what we have today. And I think that makes it less of a problem for us to choose and decide today. I personally think that it is likely to be both things. Both in some apps, you'll want them standalone, separate repos developed independently, and in other apps, you'll just want it. It's a small little thing, or you just want to add a small feature, and it doesn't warrant its own standalone thing. So.
I think this is features like Service Worker, and also like the use of WASM or the use of code splitting strategies and dynamic loading strategies. All this stuff, as we get to like the future world we want to be in, I think that apps at scale, as an app author, you actually won't want to try to like orchestrate all that stuff. It becomes overwhelming. We really do want to get to the place where the tooling and the frameworks and the languages make some good choices for you out of the box. Like just for example, I could imagine, like a future version of Ember.js or Orbit.js that you just start using it the way you would use it today, but all you notice is that it's faster because it's doing a bunch of its background work on a service worker, right? Like, deliberately without having to change the way you think about writing your code, your models and stuff, right? Your models are going to run in the service worker now, but you didn't have to think about it. Similar to like, if we made it so that we can super optimize and lazy load only the JavaScript that's needed for the first page render first, and then later load the rest of the JavaScript, you don't want to have to restructure your app around that by hand. That would be terrible. And today, that's actually how most people like do that stuff. It's very expensive and error prone. We really just want to do that stuff automatically. Like that's where the whole web needs to go, is tooling that's smarter. So my answer is like I would actually hope you don't have to like restructure anything about the way your code works. You would just turn on the feature and say like, yes, please go faster using a web worker. Right? And that's not to say like oh, don't worry about it, like don't learn that stuff. Please do, and like come help us work on the infrastructure, right? But like that work is the work that we should do together and then share by all the apps. Like apps, it's just not, most apps are not unique snowflakes enough to need something so custom there, right? They can do this, we can share these solutions. And the app-specific stuff can be very conventional and not have to think about it.
And that seemed to be one of the overarching themes of Tom's talk that was the inspiration for some of what we're talking tonight. Ember, the next 10 years, he was talking about some of that, it should just kind of automatically optimize. We should be able to split things up well. So a good video if you haven't watched it. Another one, one from before here was, I really love to see Ember being performant with respect to bundle size. Is there any plans for active support for performance boosting features like code splitting, tree shaking, etc. in the near future?
Yes.
It's on the radar.
Yeah, no. So
that actually is good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say like that is what Embroider's for.
Yeah.
Okay. And because none of those things are actually features in this, I mean, they are. But in the way that you would actually do the work to making those things happen, they're really emergent properties of a whole system that's well structured to support them. And so like efforts to do those in the small as features tend to be hard, which is why I'm kind of doing Embroider, which is to try to actually like flip the whole system over to make those things be easy.
Yeah. And I think it's more than just hard. It's also brittle, right?
Yeah.
Like it ends up like you end up having like cliffs you fall off of.
Yeah, and so so the one thing I mentioned there, just to define for people who don't know, right? Tree shaking would be the idea that just because you put some code in your app doesn't mean it's going to go get served to the browser unless it gets used, right? Like, or if you pull in a library, you only have to serve the parts of the library that are going to use, not the parts that aren't. You have a smaller bundle. Code splitting is the idea that you can only load the parts of the app that are the parts of your app code that are needed at any given time, and then load the rest later, which has a massive performance impact sometimes. And a third one that I'll add that should also just be totally automatic like that is serving much more modern ES latest code to browsers that can handle it, and only serving the heavily transpiled code to the old browsers who need it, because that also is a massive win in terms of the code complexity and the amount of code. Like just by not compiling the classes, the async functions, the fat arrows, all that stuff, many browsers can just run that stuff natively today. Our build tools can totally build two versions of your app, one that goes to the old lame browsers and one that goes to the modern browsers. And the one that goes to the modern browsers will be a lot smaller because it doesn't have all the transpilation.
Another thing from Tom's talk, in fact, that he talks about underpowered hardware in a lot of different places. That helps it a lot too.
Are those types of decisions safe to make via user agents?
Typically, the safest one the question is that safe to decide by user agent? Probably not, but that's not how we would do it. The big help here is that so modern browsers support script type equals module to load an ES module. And if they support that, then they also support a no module flag that you can put on another script that will only load, that modern browsers will then ignore that script, but old ones will still load it. So you use that trick to basically put a floor on your feature set and say, okay, browsers that support ES modules, that's like, every browser that supports ES modules also supports a long list of things that came before it in the spec process, right? So you can basically guarantee that you have support for that long list of stuff. And it's a very standard, safe way to have two script tags, one that will run in non-module browsers, one that will run in module browsers. And like that knocks off a vast list of the features.
We'll do one more here and then we'll get to your question. What is the status, because it's, I think, related, what is the status with template imports? Isn't that necessary to fix before shipping module unification for real?
Who asked this? They know what to talk about.
Yeah. Yes, it is required to ship module unification for real. Template imports is, for those who don't know, is a sort of proto-RFC that I think that's a good way to put it, I guess, that Ed wrote to actually leverage, and what it proposes is actually leveraging real JavaScript semantics in imports in your templates. So not like a helper or a keyword that is handlebars but still run, but actually the same exact import semantics, like import from semantics that you use in your JavaScript code, and put them in your template to import things into scope for your template to render. So you might import components or helpers or modifiers or whatever, and then render them in a template. That is what template imports are. The RFC is up. It has a fork repo of the Ember.js RFCs repo, and you can take a look at it. It needs a bit more work. Like we spent a very long time in the most recent face-to-face meeting that we did in Portland. I guess it was a month ago now. I don't know how long it's been. It's been a little while. We spent a really long time trying to hash out the important details of how this would work. One positive byproduct of that work was the RFC that Godfrey submitted a couple of days ago around contextual helpers and contextual modifiers. That actually is a good first step into having just rendered values. In the contextual helpers land, just like you can yield a curry component or contextual component or whatever you want to call it, you'll be able to yield a helper that you can then invoke later. And the reason that's important is because if you imagine we're importing JavaScript values to render in curlies or angle brackets or whatever, that means that you have to be able to render just plain values. So that RFC is a good first step. And it's really convenient to be able to decouple the conceptual mental model of just values or renderables or whatever you want to call those things and template imports.
Yeah, so it is the module unification. That term has been what we've called this process. Think of it as new file layout. I think is an easier way to think about it. That process has taken a long time, partly because the world kept changing around us as we were designing it before we could ship it. So like in the very earliest version, had assumptions that got broken as NPM's scope packages got popular, and then like the next iteration around ended up basically getting us in like an uncanny valley where we were kind of doing imports but not really. And then as JavaScript imports were a thing that was just getting more and more and more ecosystem support. So it finally pushed us to say like, okay, let's just unify. I'm very happy that we're landing in a direction that is a massive simplification, and I'm very happy with it. It just has meant that like there's been a lot of iteration. The community's worked really hard, and I know like I'm as anxious as anybody to actually see it ship. But we're taking advantage of massive simplifications to keep up with changing conditions, and it will come out very good. Okay. We don't want to rush it and make people change their apps and then make people change their apps again.
The Ember way.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the back.
So it's been commonplace in web applications for at least 15 years to accept data from end users, like text, and then show it in the context of your application. But something that I don't think we have a full story for is allowing end users to write programs of some kind of script, or also CSS.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as the most promising way forward for that?
Interesting. So promising. What's the most promising way forward for letting users actually provide, code or styles or things like that run in the app, presumably in a safe way? I mean, the good news of client side is that it's running on their own machine with data that they legally can access. So that piece of it is not so bad. It gets much harder when you're going to let them share that for everybody else. So like letting users like customize their very own personal experience is actually not so bad, because it turns out that's not a security problem, and they're the only one getting the code. But as soon as they can share it to other users, yes, now you have a very big challenge. And in JavaScript spec land, the proposal that gets you the closest to having a really elegant way to let untrusted code not subvert everybody's security is the Frozen Realms proposal of TC39. It's like, I don't think it's shipped anywhere yet, right? It's an idea. It's basic, but so that'd be one thing to look at. In terms of like practical today, what can you do? I would not make strong bets about letting users like inject JavaScript, certainly in a way that's safe, unless you're going to have a totally separate domain for it in an iframe that is running only there and has no access to your other stuff. That would be the safest thing you could do. Style sheets, I guess I'd be a little less worried. Like worst case, they make their site really ugly, I guess. I know it's not an easy problem to solve in a way that's elegant, but it's at least the stakes are more like, well, even there you can imagine security things. People really get tricky.
Well,
so,
I mean, there's been apps I've worked on that have had similar constraints, and in the case where it's just a regular user, I guess it's quite difficult, very difficult. When you're talking about like a site admin or like a hosted, like a Ghost situation, like where it's a hosted blog platform, but it's your domain, it's your app. Being able to provide custom scripts to run or CSS to load is much more constrained environment in that case. Having the API, having APIs to save and persist JavaScript to run, and then have those stream back out when requested by user. All that is stuff that you could totally set up and do, but it's all got like minefield a mile long. Like it's very difficult to do and easy to screw up.
Yeah, it would be very cool to do a like restricted mode handlebars, because we could control much more of the inputs there. It's not a thing I know that anybody's implemented, but
so
yeah. So yeah, that would be cool.
I did a thing.
So I think before we get there, we're getting close to the 8:30 mark. Yes, Jen.
Oh,
or
no.
Did you have something?
Nope, I have nothing else to add. Let's go.
I want to get to one topic that's been in a couple of questions and also in the live stream. Octane, Ember Octane. Generally speaking, I don't know if anybody wants to give like a really high level, just helpful description for everyone. What is Octane? And one of the specific questions we got is, how do we prepare our application for transition to Octane? Do we have to do anything? Are there patterns to avoid? Things like this.
Yeah. So Octane is like basically a way you measure the amount of NOx in the engine per.
That is a different Octane, which is really useful for anybody with a car.
Anyways, Ember Octane is a new edition of Ember. It will usher in a number of. It'll bring to the forefront a number of new features that we've been working on for quite a long time. Features like angle bracket invocation, named arguments, Glimmer components, slew of other things, launch unification, new file layout, a whole slew of other things. I'm sure I'm dropping the ball on some of the things. There's a big list. The question though, so that's what Octane is.
Which is just to point out that like these are features that already have landed or like people are maybe using already in their apps. So it's not like a whole new Ember to like suddenly move to.
I think the idea is that all of these features you could use and opt into or start using in your app today. The reason we have an edition is so we can rally behind a set of features, a common mental model, a common way that we're building apps together under this name.
Yeah, it's like a way to signify like, hey, if you've been waiting to look at like what all this new stuff is, this is a point where we've hopefully made it all actually make sense. The docs all reflect it. It's actually ready. Like without making everybody, in software, there's definitely this challenge, right? You really want to ship it incrementally. You want to ship small changes over time that add up to big changes. But when you're trying to change the programming model, change the way people think about their apps, when you're shipping features incrementally, you end up with intermediate states for those. Well, there's an old way to do it. There's a new way to do it. The docs are slowly moving over. The point of Octane or any addition, this is going to be our first try at making an addition, is to like have a line in the sand where you say, this is the way we do it now, and everything is consistent. So if you've been waiting for that time, now's the time to take a look at it.
And it importantly doesn't mean that it's a breaking change release and we stop supporting all the old stuff.
Yeah,
totally. It just means that it's a new launching point for folks and a nice, simple way to codify the set of features that we're talking about collectively together.
When someone says, how do we future-proof our new Ember application for Octane, really is keep up to date with Ember updates as they come out, right? Because it's just going to be a smooth transition to whenever you say it. That's right. This is Octane.
Yeah, I think there's a number of features in Octane that will have some code mods. Obviously, there's some work to be done in a few places, but things like new file layouts, we don't really expect people to manually move their files around and to the new locations and stuff. So lots of that will happen automatically by tooling. There are things that are probably pretty important to just be aware of, and features you should totally take a look at the list of RFCs and whatnot that are going to be included there, and you should try to understand what's being talked about. But I think from my seat, I think that the learning team has a really good handle on how to present both of the diff of, hey, I know let's say I'm current today. I know all the things right now. And what do I need to know about this Octane thing? And what's the diff of knowledge? And then in addition, how do I start learning to make a new Ember app today and don't have to think about the old stuff.
Yeah.
So I think.
I just want to add too that when the learning team has done a review of some of the features that are coming down the pipeline over for their first Octaneified release and then any subsequent ones. One of the things that we're kind of looking at is it's not a binary decision either of like my app is Octaneified versus it's not. It's more like we're going, if you want to use angle brackets components, for example, that's a feature that's available in Ember today. You can do some of your components in angle brackets and some not. It's going to be something that you can kind of walk through with your team, and depending on how you build apps, depending on how you have architected things, there's going to be a lot of different ways to adopt it, either incrementally or sort of in a big swoop.
Yeah. Can I think of it as a flex fuel vehicle to really go back to that analogy? You can put in E85, you can put in 99 for a race car. Like you can adopt those different approaches.
Yeah, I mean the advice to staying compatible, it hasn't changed in a long time. It is. We care a lot about backward compatibility. Nothing should be breaking when you go and upgrade to releases that are not a major, which we do very rarely. And so please upgrade. And if the Ember 6-week cycle is too fast for your team, that's totally fine. Use the LTS cycle, and when LTS releases come out, do that upgrade. But by doing one of those two paths, you end up following well-trodden paths that many other teams have done, and so the gotchas will be well known and well sanded down for you if you're doing that, as opposed to trying to make massive jumps in one jump from a very old Ember to a very new Ember. Go through the LTSs, and when you get to each LTS, you're gonna get new deprecation warnings. Those are there to help you. They're not shaming you, but they're telling you that before you go to the next major, you're gonna want to deal with those.
Maybe both. Rob's saying there's a little shame there.
Maybe a little bit.
Not Game of Thrones.
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Can I interject too? LTS stands for long-term
support. Long-term support releases, yeah.
And our current, the latest, the 3.0 series LTSs are 3.0.
No. 218 and 3.4.
218 and 3.4. Okay.
Those are the two current LTS.
So,
Yeah, 3.4 was the first of the 3 series.
Okay.
3.0 doesn't become an LTS because it's just too new.
Yeah.
But to be LTS, it has to have big for a while.
Sure.
We've reached 8:30. If anybody needs to go, feel free. Do we have to close up, or should we take one or two last questions?
Wrap it up.
All right. I saw one question. Was there any other questions anybody else had?
One here.
Yeah.
That explains it.
Motives.
Just answer my question.
Our Salsify representative.
Yeah. So some of these lightning talks had a kind of some theme of performance. When I think of the most resource-intensive desktop applications, I think of video editing software. I think of CAD tools. I haven't seen any of these really be built well in a web application. And talking about WebAssembly, talking about service workers and shared workers, are those going to open the doors to building some of these more resource-intensive applications in the web, or are we never going to see a best-in-class video editor software?
Good question.
Will we see Adobe Premiere or Lightroom or heavy-duty best-in-class applications in web browsers?
Or a good one. Yeah.
Or good. Oh, shots fired.
I think probably yes. I think the tech demo stuff that we've seen so far has been things like AAA game rendering kind of stuff actually working. So that's a pretty good proof. Right now it's somewhat specialized and only those demos only performed well on Firefox, and there's reasons for that. So I think probably yes. I don't think it'll be an overnight thing. I think that people will find product niches where they get to take advantage of the things Tom mentioned with the low friction of the web and all that, where there are inherent advantages over apps that need to get somebody to download it and try it out. So people will find places where you can use that, I think, to do these kind of things. A much more, probably the video editor that would win on the web and start to actually get popular would be one that has way more collaborativeness to it than the desktop ones people are used to, right? Something like that, would be my guess for when you'd see that. I do think it's possible. Yeah.
There's a.
Or is it related to?
Yeah. There's a port of VLC like for WASM.
Nice.
And the implementer has like a list of features that it still needs to like do true multimedia, multi-threading and stuff. So I think there's just Slack and stuff in the WASM tool chain.
Nice.
Any other questions? I saw one more. You
like
got the second question. Let's hear it.
Yeah, it's a two-part thing. I was gonna say I'm a huge fan of like the changes that went into how we test Ember applications recently in 3.0, like specifically around what we import from Ember QUnit versus QUnit proper.
Me too.
And I was wondering, since you guys have your, I don't know what the term is, ear closer to the ground, is that right? Something like that. What, how the community at large has responded to those changes, and if there are any other changes you guys would like to see, you all like to see, what's next?
On testing specifically, or just that shape?
Testing in general, like test them. We
have a big fan of Ember 3's testing approach, and wondering what kind of new improvements we'd like to see in Ember testing.
So I think I guess there was a few parts to the question. I will try to answer them all. The first one is like, I think basically how is the rest of the community taken to the new testing system, positive, negative feedback, what works well, what doesn't work well, that kind of stuff, right? Is that about okay? So I think overall, most people that I talk to have similar feelings to you. Most people think it's massively easier to understand where the Ember magic is and where the normal testing is and how they're supposed to structure things and how to compose tests together. Instead of them being this like monolithic module for component thing or whatever, you can bring in nice community helpers and build things together. So I think that's good. It also makes it clearer when you do like run into a wall or have a problem, you know where to go look. I should go look in Ember Test Helpers repo and file an issue there, or I should go to QUnit or whatever. So all those things I think are really nice. But overall, the uptake has been good. I think there was a few specific gotchas that have caused some people some pain around the fact that the old system, if you happen to take advantage of what I think is essentially a bug in the old system, which is that the normal app boot process didn't happen in component tests or unit tests. Like basically we didn't run initializers. We didn't run instance initializers. If you we're used to not doing that, and so you were manually doing it, it became a little bit annoying to undo all that work. However, I think the new system is massively simpler to reason about, and you also have the benefit of actually testing your app the way it boots in production, which is way better than what we had before. But I think it took a lot of rethinking what the pieces are and how to put them together to understand how to do it. And to the second question, which was, are there other changes coming? The answer is yes. Not nearly that level, not nearly that like overarching everything gets changed. I have a short list of RFCs that I have been supposed to been writing for roughly 6 months. Anybody that wants to write RFCs, let me know. I will offload them. But the list is basically, the first one is the, right now you import set up application test, set up rendering test, set up test from Ember QUnit. I want to make those import from a helper file in your app so that you can customize. If you have a thing you literally want to do for every one of those, like you want to register a custom service, like you want to have just a mock Stripe service that runs in each test, you'll be able to do. It would just by default re-export from Ember QUnit. So it's no actual functional difference. It just gives you an integration point to be able to update what your app does when you call set up application tests, for example. Yes, but without resolver shenanigans, yes. It's just JavaScript. The second one is that right now this .set inside of a test synchronously flushes the run loop. And as a concept, part of Ember Octane is that we want to eliminate the run loop from the mental model of Ember users. So that means that in like rendering tests where you this.set some value and then you assert that it rendered, you'll have an async step there basically. So you'll like, oh wait, this.set maybe, or you'll have an async step. Right now it isn't async. It seems surprising because as you think about it in production and in development, it's never actually synchronously updating the DOM. If we did that, we would be very trolly on performance. It's really bad. Don't do that. Anyways, so this is just another step into making the testing harness more in line with what is actually happening in reality. And it's likely that the APIs that we have to introduce for that will have to be opt-in, and you'll have to be able to do it by like module or something, because you can imagine it takes quite a lot of time to update large application test suites. So it'll be a similar, probably code mod assisted, but similar rollout process. And I think those are the big ones. There's others, but I'm sure I'm over on time. So.
Good. We've been given the blessing to stay here till midnight, right? Oh. There's one question. There's a yes/no question that we could close. Well, are we going to lose existing advanced abilities with the move to track properties? I'm thinking of computed property macros, but there may be other things.
No.
A yes/no, but no. We will not lose any existing advanced abilities. Fantastic.
Decorators are magic. They can do magic.
There's your answer, Gary. Decorators are magic. And then, we got a little love. Someone wrote in and said it'd be so great if Ember Engine could share dependency with parent host apps. He specifically said, any thoughts about that, Dan? But you could always tweet about it or something as well. And also, thanks to the entire team for doing awesome work. Keep rocking. This was not in there, but I'll add it. So, unless you want to have
I don't know. How can I follow that up? You
gotta have a rocket answer. You can just say Ed's gonna solve that in Embroider.
Yeah, I think there's some. I think that, well, number one, so the question was about sharing dependencies between hosts and add-ons, and there's a couple different hosts and engines, and there's a couple different ways you could look at that. You could think of that as sharing package dependencies, or you could think about that as sharing capabilities. So currently, the only capabilities that can be shared across the boundary between engines and their hosts are services. You can't say have components that are shared between the two. And the reason for that is that engines are built with strong isolation. They have their own resolver, their own container, and it's not so easy to just hoist one thing from across that boundary and share it when it actually brings a lot more. So I think what once we have better packaging and code splitting capabilities and lazy loading capabilities across different boundaries and enabled by Embroider and improvements in our build tooling, then people will stop using engines as a means to lazy load and lazy load capabilities. And so basically people will build engines because they want the isolation, which is really engines' architectural strength, is that isolation. And if they just want code splitting and they want to share capabilities between different packages, between different parts of the app, and just have it all worked out and lazy loaded, then they'll do that without an engine. They won't have that formal isolation. So I think it'll be, people will be dealing with engines as they were originally intended, as opposed to just a vehicle to getting code splitting. So
I think that probably calls it a wrap, unless someone had mentioned about they're really interested in guides and stuff. And I think look for how things are going to change with Ember Octane and how there's just going to be continuous improvements on the learning side.
I'd like to add that if anyone wants to ask questions of the core team, or any of the core teams, plural, I should say, there's learning, there's CLI, there's data, and then there's the framework core team. They can also submit questions to the Ember.js Times, and we do kind of long form answers there as well as short little snippets. So we'll be taking this list, and I'll share the submissions for the forms tonight with the Ember Times team, and we can kind of work our way through these things over the next few weeks.
We literally got through every single question or a shade of every single question we got in by asking that very last one I did. So thank you so much, everyone. I think thanks so much. We'll I suppose end the live stream now.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone tuning in on the live stream. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
And then if anybody wants a beverage afterward, is there beverages anywhere?
There better be.
All right, there'll be beverages. Stick around. I'll let you know where they're.
How's the live stream going?
Let me see. Let me turn this off.